The alarm bells had been ringing for 6 hours straight on the space station orbiting Earth. Captain Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he watched another transport ship launch from the dying planet below. The blue marble that had been humanity's home for millions of years was now covered in strange red patches that grew larger each day. Jake turned to Admiral Lisa Hayes, who stood beside him looking at the evacuation reports. Her face was grim as she read the numbers. A loud 800 million people had made it to the ship so far, but there were still 7 billion more down there. The transport ships could only carry so many at once, and time was running out fast. Dr. Paul Richards rushed into the command center holding a datapad. His lab coat was stained with coffee and his eyes were red from lack of sleep. He had been working for 3 days straight trying to understand what was happening to Earth. The news he brought was not good. The planet's magnetic field was failing. Something in the deep ocean was eating away at the minerals that kept Earth's protective shield working. Without that shield, the sun's radiation would cook everything on the surface within months. The red patches they could see from space were already dead zones where nothing could live anymore. Lisa punched the wall in frustration. The Galactic Council had known about this problem for 8 months. 8 whole months while humanity begged for help. The council members from other worlds had spent that time in meetings and debates. They talked about procedures and protocols. While billions of humans faced death, Jake remembered the first council meeting he had attended as Earth's military representative. The alien delegates had sat in their fancy chairs made of crystal and metal. They spoke in calm voices about the need to study the situation more. They wanted to understand the science before taking action. Meanwhile, every day that passed meant more humans would die. The council had finally agreed to send help 3 weeks ago. Their ships were coming with terraforming equipment and medical supplies, but they would not arrive for another 2 months. By then, Earth would be a dead rock floating in space. Ambassador Zeth Kar from the Aldorian Republic had tried to speed things up. He was one of the few aliens who seemed to actually care about human lives. But even he could not make the council move faster. The other species had their own problems, and Earth was just one world among thousands. Paul showed them his latest readings. The organism that was destroying Earth's magnetic field was not natural. Someone had made it in a laboratory. The genetic code was too perfect and too focused. It was designed specifically to attack the minerals found only on Earth. This was not an accident or a random plague. Someone had murdered humanity's homeworld on purpose. Jake felt anger burning in his chest. Who would do such a thing? Humans had only been part of the galactic community for 50 years. They had not made any major enemies that he knew of. Earth traded peacefully with other worlds and followed all the council rules. Yet someone had decided that humanity needed to be wiped out. Another transport ship appeared on the main screen. This one was coming from North America and was packed with refugees from the dead zones. The red patches were spreading faster now. Whole cities had been evacuated as the radiation levels climbed. The people on those ships had lost everything they ever owned. Lisa coordinated with the transport pilots to find space for the new arrivals. The colony ships were already overcrowded. Families were sleeping in hallways and storage rooms. Food supplies were running low despite careful rationing. But no one complained because they all knew how lucky they were to be alive. The evacuation fleet consisted of everything humanity could get into space. Old cargo ships had been converted to carry people. Research vessels designed for small crews now held thousands of refugees. Even luxury yachts owned by rich people had been pressed into service. Every ship that could fly was being used to save lives. Dr. Richards pulled up a map of Earth on the main display. The red zones now covered most of Africa and were spreading into Europe and Asia. Australia was already completely dead. The oceans around the infected areas had turned a sickly green color as the organisms multiplied. Soon there would be nowhere left for humans to live on their birth world. Jake watched a group of children playing in one of the ship's common areas. They were too young to understand what was happening. To them, this was just an adventure in space. But their parents knew the truth. These kids would never see Earth as a living world. They would grow up as refugees among the stars. The communication system crackled to life. Captain Ben Carter was calling from the colony ship New Dawn. His vessel was the largest in the fleet and served as the command ship for the entire evacuation. He reported that the final transport runs were beginning. They would try to save as many people as possible in the next 48 hours. Paul estimated that maybe 1 billion humans could be rescued if everything went perfectly. That would leave 7 billion to die on Earth. The numbers were horrible. To think about, families would be separated forever. Children would lose their parents. Entire cultures and languages would disappear when their speakers died. Ambassador Zethkar had promised that the council would investigate who was responsible for this attack. He swore that justice would be served and the criminals would be punished. But that would not bring back the dead or restore Earth to life. Justice felt empty when faced with genocide on such a massive scale. Jake looked at Earth one last time through the observation window. The planet that had given birth to humanity was dying before his eyes. Soon it would be just another dead rock, in space like so many others. But the humans who escaped would carry Earth's memory with them to the stars. They would build new homes and new lives far from here. The evacuation fleet began its final preparations for departure. Once the last transport ships arrived, they would leave Earth forever. The survivors would scatter across the galaxy to find new worlds to call home. They would have to start over from nothing, but they were alive, and that was what mattered most. As the fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, Jake made a silent promise. Humanity would survive this disaster. They would grow strong again, and someday they would find whoever had done this terrible thing. When that day came, there would be a reckoning among the stars. 15 years had passed since the Great Evacuation, and humanity had spread across 12 different star systems. Colony Commander Ben Carter walked through the busy streets of New Seattle on the planet they called Kepler Prime. The morning sun felt warm on his face as vendors called out their prices for fresh vegetables grown in the local farms. It was hard to believe this thriving city had been nothing but bare rock and thin air when the first human ships arrived. The refugees had worked day and night to build atmospheric processors and terraform the planet. What should have taken centuries according to galactic standards had been completed in just 8 years. The Aldorian trade delegation followed Ben through the market district with wide eyes. Ambassador Zethkar had seen many worlds during his long career, but nothing quite like this. The humans had not just survived on Kepler Prime, they had made it into something beautiful. Gardens lined every street and clean water flowed through. Channels carved into the walkways. Dr. Kate Sullivan met them at the industrial complex on the edge of the city. She was now the chief engineer for all human colonies, and her reputation had spread throughout the galaxy. The fusion reactors she had designed were powering not just human worlds, but had been sold to dozens of other species. Her technology was cleaner and more efficient than anything the Galactic Council had ever seen. Kate showed the aliens through her latest creation. The reactor core was smaller than a house, but could power an entire city. The safety systems were so advanced that even a direct hit from a warship could not cause a dangerous explosion. The Aldorians took careful notes and asked many technical questions that Kate answered with patience. On the other side of the galaxy, another human colony was making headlines. Proxima Settlement had become the center of scientific research for the entire region. Dr. Alex Turner had just announced his breakthrough in quantum communication technology. His team had found a way to send messages instantly across vast distances without using the slow relay networks that other species depended on. The implications were staggering. Trade agreements could be negotiated in real time between worlds that were hundreds of light years apart. Military coordination became possible on a galactic scale. Scientific discoveries could be shared immediately instead of taking months or years to spread. The old ways of doing business across space were suddenly obsolete. Alex stood in his laboratory surrounded by equipment that looked like art as much as science. Crystalline arrays hummed with energy while holographic displays showed data flowing between distant stars. His team included humans who had been children during the evacuation. They had grown up among the stars, and their minds worked differently than people born on a single world. The breakthrough had come when Alex realized that space itself could be used as a communication medium. Instead of sending signals through normal space, his quantum transmitters created tiny holes in reality. Information could pass through these holes instantly regardless of distance. The physics was complex, but the results were simple and revolutionary. Back on Kepler Prime, Ben was meeting with Captain Steve Martinez, who commanded the human security forces in this sector. Steve had arrived on an urgent transport from the Outer Rim where his teams had been hunting pirates. The news he brought was both good and troubling. 3 major pirate fleets that had terrorized galactic shipping for decades were no longer a problem. Steve's forces had destroyed them completely in a series of lightning raids. The human tactics were unlike anything the pirates had faced before. Instead of massive fleet battles, Steve used small, fast ships that appeared without warning and vanished just as quickly, but the pirates had not gone down without a fight. During interrogation of captured raiders, Steve had learned something disturbing. The pirate leaders claimed they were working for someone else. They spoke of ancient masters who paid them to attack specific targets. The pirates did not know who these masters were, but they described technology far beyond anything in the current galaxy. Steve showed Ben recordings from the pirate ships. Strange symbols covered their hulls, and their weapons used energy types that human scientists could not identify. Most disturbing were references to Earth in the pirates' communications. They had been specifically ordered to watch for human expansion and report back to their mysterious employers. Kate joined the meeting after finishing with the Eldorian delegation. She had noticed something odd about recent attacks on human shipping. The pirates always seemed to know exactly which routes human traders would use. They targeted ships carrying specific types of cargo, especially scientific equipment and research data. It was as if someone was trying to slow down human technological development. Dr. Turner arrived by quantum communicator from Proxima Settlement. His image appeared as a perfect hologram in the center of the room. He had been analyzing the pirate data that Steve had shared across the quantum network. The energy signatures from their weapons matched readings he had found in deep space. Alex explained that his long-range sensors had detected artificial structures hidden in the dark matter clouds between galaxies. These objects were ancient beyond measure and clearly not built by any known species. They seemed to be monitoring stations watching all galactic communications. Someone had been spying on the entire galaxy for a very long time. Ben felt a chill run down his spine. Earth had been destroyed by an engineered plague that targeted the planet's unique geology. Now pirates with unknown masters were harassing human colonies. Ancient monitoring stations were watching everything that happened. In galactic space, this was not a series of coincidences. Kate pulled up a star map showing all human colonies. Each world was thriving and growing faster than anyone had expected. Human technology was advancing at a pace that amazed even their own scientists. The refugees who had fled Earth, as broken survivors, were becoming something new and powerful among the stars. Perhaps that was the problem. Maybe someone did not want humanity to grow strong. The same forces that had destroyed Earth might be trying to finish the job. At this time, humans were not helpless victims trapped on a single world. They were spread across the galaxy with technology and allies that their enemies might not expect. Steve made preparations to investigate the monitoring stations that Alex had discovered. If someone was watching humanity from the shadows, it was time to watch them back. The children of Earth had learned hard lessons about survival. They would not be caught off guard again. Ben looked at the thriving city outside his window. 15 years ago, these people had been refugees fleeing a dying world. Now they were building a new civilization among the stars. Whatever ancient enemy had destroyed Earth would find that humanity had grown beyond their worst fears. The Council investigation ship Mercy of Stars entered Earth's dead solar system with full scientific equipment and a team of the galaxy's best researchers. Lead investigator Kruland had examined hundreds of dead worlds during his long career. But something about Earth made his scales crawl with unease. The planet hung in space like a diseased eye staring back at him. Dr. Maya Roberts stood beside the alien investigator as their ship approached the ruins of humanity's birth world. She had been chosen to represent human interests in this investigation because she understood both human and galactic science. Maya had also been born on Earth during the final evacuation and carried memories of her dying homeworld that still haunted her dreams. The scanning equipment revealed the full scope of the disaster as they entered orbit. The red zones that had spread across Earth 15 years ago were now crystallized wastelands where nothing could ever live again. The oceans had turned into thick, poisonous soup that glowed with unnatural light. Even the atmosphere was wrong. With gases that should not exist in nature, Krulinth activated the deep scanning arrays and frowned at the results. The bioweapon that had killed Earth was still active after all these years. Most plagues burned out quickly once they ran out of hosts to infect. But this engineered organism continued to multiply and spread even though there was nothing left for it to feed on. It was as if the weapon had been designed to keep Earth dead forever. Maya reviewed the genetic analysis that Dr. Paul Richards had sent from the human research stations. The bioweapon showed clear signs of deliberate engineering. Its DNA contained sequences that could not have evolved naturally. Someone had spent decades, or perhaps centuries, designing the perfect killer for Earth's unique environment. Security Chief Logan Price coordinated with Council enforcement teams as they prepared to land on the planet's surface. Logan had served in human military forces since before the evacuation, and his experience with dangerous missions made him the obvious choice to lead security for this investigation. His teams carried weapons designed to work in Earth's hostile environment. The landing shuttles descended through the poisoned atmosphere toward what had once been New York City. Maya remembered playing in Central Park as a child before the evacuation began. Now the entire area was covered in crystal formations that grew from the infected soil like a cancer. The buildings had collapsed and been consumed by the same crystalline growth. As they walked through the ruins in their environmental suits, Maya felt tears forming in her eyes. This had been her home where millions of people had lived and worked and loved. Now it was a tomb where even bacteria could not survive. The silence was complete except for the sound of their own breathing and the click of radiation counters. Krulinth took samples of the crystal formations and ran immediate analysis. The readings made him call for additional equipment from orbit. The crystals contained trace elements that should not exist anywhere in this galaxy. These minerals were found only in the cores of dead stars and required impossible pressures to form. Yet here they were growing like weeds from Earth's contaminated soil. Dr. Richards arrived on the second shuttle with specialized equipment designed to trace the bioweapon's origin. His analysis confirmed Maya's worst fears. The genetic markers in the weapon pointed to biotechnology far beyond any known galactic civilization. Whoever had created this plague possessed science that made the Council's best researchers look like children playing with toys. The investigation team found fragments of intercepted communications in the ruins of Earth's old defense networks. Most of the data had been corrupted by radiation, but Logan's experts managed to recover some files. The conversations were in languages that predated the current galactic community by thousands of years. Maya listened to the ancient voices with growing horror. They spoke of humanity as the young race and discussed something called preventing the convergence. The speakers seemed to know everything about human development and had been planning Earth's destruction for generations. This was not a random attack, but part of a long campaign against species that showed dangerous potential. Krulinth discovered evidence that similar bioweapons had been used before on other worlds. The genetic signatures were different, but the engineering principles were identical. Someone had perfected the art of planetary genocide and had been practicing it throughout galactic history. Earth was just the latest victim in a war that most species did not even know was being fought. The team explored the ruins of human research facilities looking for more clues about their enemy. In the basement of what had been the Global Science Institute, they found intact data cores that had somehow survived the planetary disaster. The information contained within those cores would change everything the galaxy thought it knew about its own history. Dr. Richards worked for hours to decode the archived files while Maya and Logan searched for additional data storage. The research showed that human scientists had detected the monitoring stations months before Earth's destruction. They had been trying to contact other species about the threat when the bioweapon was released. The files contained detailed scans of the ancient structures hidden in dark matter clouds between galaxies. These stations were not just watching galactic communications, they were actively controlling them. Messages between worlds were being filtered and modified to prevent certain types of cooperation. Species that might have worked together to advance beyond current technology levels were being kept apart. Maya realized that humanity's rapid development after the evacuation had been unexpected. The ancient enemy had planned for humans to die slowly on their infected homeworld. Instead, the survivors had scattered across the galaxy and evolved beyond all predictions. The monitoring systems had not been prepared for refugees who adapted and grew stronger. Instead of weaker, Logan found weapons caches that human military forces had hidden before the evacuation. The equipment was primitive compared to what humans used now, but it contained data about Earth's final defensive preparations. The files showed that human leaders had suspected they were facing an enemy much older and more dangerous than anything in recorded galactic history. As the investigation team prepared to leave Earth's dead surface, Maya took one last look at the ruins of her birth world. The ancient enemy had succeeded in destroying humanity's home, but they had failed to destroy humanity itself. The scattered children of Earth had grown into something their killers had never expected. Crueland filed his preliminary report with the Council as their ship departed the dead solar system. The evidence was clear that Earth's destruction had been a deliberate act of genocide, committed by forces unknown to current galactic civilization. But more disturbing was the possibility that this ancient enemy was still active and might strike again. The investigation would continue at other dead worlds throughout the galaxy. If the pattern held true, they would find evidence of similar attacks stretching back thousands of years. An enemy had been manipulating galactic development since before the Council existed, and Earth had been just their latest target in a war against evolution itself. The ancient archives of the Centauri Library contained knowledge from 1,000,000 dead civilizations, but nothing had prepared Librarian Prime Veltar for what Dr. Maya Roberts was showing him. The human scientist had spent 3 months analyzing extinction patterns across galactic history, and her findings threatened everything the Council believed about their past. Maya spread holographic displays across the vast research chamber showing 17 different worlds that had suffered mysterious disasters. Each planet had been home to a species that was advancing rapidly in technology and culture. Each world had died just as its people achieved faster than light communication with other species. The pattern was too perfect to be natural coincidence. Veltar examined the data with growing alarm. His people had maintained these archives for thousands of years and prided themselves on understanding galactic history. But the connections Maya was making had escaped their notice because the extinctions were spread across such vast time periods. No single generation of archivists had lived long enough to see the full scope of the pattern. Commander Ryan Clark transmitted his report from the deep space reconnaissance mission that had taken his ships beyond the galactic rim. What they had found in the Andromeda signal cluster confirmed Maya's worst fears about the enemy they faced. Hidden monitoring stations older than any known civilization were actively watching and controlling galactic development. The stations bore markings that Veltar recognized from the oldest texts in his archive. The symbols belonged to the Harbingers, a species that supposedly died out millions of years ago when their star went supernova. But the technology Ryan had discovered was clearly still functional and following protocols established eons before. The current galactic community existed. Intelligence Officer Nicole Adams worked alongside Ryan's team to decode the ancient communication networks. The Harbingers had not died out as galactic history claimed. They had simply withdrawn to the dark spaces between galaxies where they could monitor younger species without being detected. For millions of years, they had been shepherding galactic development like farmers tending livestock. Nicole's translation of their data protocols revealed the true scope of their manipulation. Any species that showed signs of surpassing Harbinger technology was marked for elimination. The bioweapons used on Earth were just one tool in an arsenal designed to prevent what they called convergence events. They feared that younger species might evolve beyond their control and threaten their position as galactic masters. Dr. Paul Richards coordinated with teams across human space to analyze biological samples from the dead worlds Maya had identified. Each extinction had been carefully tailored to the victim species and their home environment. The Harbingers had studied their targets for generations before striking with weapons specifically designed to cause maximum damage. The bioweapon that killed Earth was actually one of their more sophisticated creations. Most species had been eliminated with simpler methods like engineered plagues or solar manipulation, but humanity's rapid technological development had required a more permanent solution. The Harbingers wanted to ensure that Earth could never be reclaimed or restored by survivors. Maya discovered that humanity's evolution since the evacuation had triggered every automated warning system the Harbingers had established. Human colonies were advancing faster than any species in recorded history. Their technology was becoming too sophisticated and their expansion too rapid. The Harbingers considered humanity an existential threat that required immediate elimination. Ryan's Deep space patrols detected massive energy signatures moving through dark matter clouds toward human territory. The Harbingers were mobilizing their main fleet for the first time in millions of years. Their worldships were larger than anything in the current galaxy and carried weapons that could sterilize entire star systems. They were not coming to conquer human colonies, but to erase them completely. Nicole intercepted communications between Harbinger fleet commanders as they planned their assault. The ancient species had been surprised by humanity's survival and growth after Earth's destruction. Their models had predicted that the refugees would scatter and gradually decline without their homeworld. Instead, humans had adapted and thrived. In ways that exceeded all their projections, the Harbingers viewed this unexpected development as proof that humanity was exactly the kind of threat they existed to eliminate. A species that could survive planetary genocide and emerge stronger was too dangerous to be allowed to continue existing. Their final solution would be to hunt down every human colony and destroy them all in a coordinated strike. Veltar accessed the deepest archives to research Harbinger capabilities and weaknesses. The ancient texts described them as masters of matter manipulation who could reshape worlds with their technology. They had once ruled a galactic empire that spanned multiple galaxies before withdrawing to become hidden watchers. Their science was based on controlling and limiting development rather than advancing it. Dr. Richards made a disturbing discovery while analyzing Harbinger bioweapons. The organisms were designed not just to kill, but to prevent any form of recovery or adaptation. They attacked the genetic foundations of life itself, making it impossible for natural evolution to develop resistance. This was not warfare, but systematic sterilization of biological potential. Maya presented her findings to an emergency session of the Galactic Council. The chamber that had once debated whether to help humanity now faced a threat that made their previous concerns seem trivial. Every species in the galaxy was potentially at risk if they advanced too quickly or showed too much independence from established patterns. Ambassador Zethkar spoke for many council members when he declared that the Harbingers represented a threat to galactic freedom itself. For millions of years, they had been secretly controlling which species lived and which died based on their own ancient prejudices. The Council had never been truly independent, but merely puppets dancing to Harbinger manipulation. The debate that followed lasted for days as representatives from hundreds of worlds tried to comprehend the scope of their situation. Some argued for appeasement, hoping that the Harbingers might be satisfied with destroying only human colonies. Others insisted that surrender would only delay the inevitable, as their own species might be next on the elimination list. Commander Clark's latest reports ended the debate. The Harbinger fleet was approaching human space and would arrive within months. Their communications indicated that any species that allied with humanity would also be marked for destruction. The ancient shepherds had decided that the current galactic community had become too independent and needed to be culled back to manageable levels. The Council faced a choice that would determine the fate of galactic civilization. They could abandon humanity to preserve their own species for a little longer, or they could stand together against an enemy that had manipulated them for millions of years. Either way, the age of Harbinger control was coming to an end, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The Harbinger fleet emerged from dark space like a plague of metal moons blotting out the stars around human territory. Fleet Admiral Chris Thompson watched from the bridge of his flagship, Horizon's Edge, as sensors struggled to measure the enormous ships approaching his defensive positions. Each Harbinger world ship was larger than most human cities and carried weapons that could crack planets in half. Chris had spent the last 6 months preparing for this battle while human engineers worked around the clock to upgrade their ships with new technology. The fusion reactors that Dr. Kate Sullivan had perfected were now powering weapon systems that pushed the laws of physics to their breaking point. Every human vessel had been modified with quantum communication arrays that Dr. Alex Turner had designed. To coordinate their attacks, the Galactic Council had surprised everyone by choosing to stand with humanity against the ancient threat. Ambassador Zethkar commanded a mixed fleet of ships from dozens of different species, all united in their determination to break free from millions of years of Harbinger control. For the first time in galactic history, every major civilization was working together toward a common goal. Kate supervised the final preparations of her greatest creation from the engineering decks of New Terra Colony. The Genesis Protocol was not a weapon in any traditional sense, but rather a tool for creating life on a massive scale. Her quantum terraforming network could seed new worlds and restore dead planets faster than any previous technology. It was the opposite of everything the Harbingers represented. The first Harbinger assault came without warning as their ships materialized throughout human space using matter transportation technology beyond current understanding. Captain Jake Morrison led the defense of Kepler Prime while evacuation ships carried civilians to safety. The human tactics were unlike anything the ancient enemy had faced before, as small, fast vessels appeared from hyperspace to strike and vanish. Again, Jake coordinated with pilots who had grown up among the stars and understood three-dimensional warfare in ways that planet-bound species could not match. They used asteroid fields and gas giant atmospheres to hide their approach, while quantum communicators allowed perfect coordination across vast distances. The Harbingers found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to stand still and be destroyed. Dr. Maya Roberts worked frantically in her laboratory aboard the research station orbiting New Terra as the battle raged around them. She had discovered that the Genesis Protocol could do more than just create life on dead worlds. The same quantum technology could seed living organisms with adaptive genetic codes that would evolve rapidly to fill empty environmental niches. The Harbinger world ships began their systematic destruction of human colonies using weapons that unmade matter at the molecular level. Entire moons simply ceased to exist as the ancient technology reduced them to component atoms. But for every world they destroyed, 3 more seemed to spring to life as Kate's terraforming network spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Commander Ryan Clark led deep strike missions against Harbinger command ships while they focused on destroying human planets. His teams had studied the ancient enemy's technology and found weaknesses in systems that had not been updated for millions of years. The Harbingers had become overconfident in their technological superiority and failed to adapt to new forms of warfare. Intelligence Officer Nicole Adams monitored Harbinger communications as their fleet commanders struggled to understand what was happening. Their ancient protocols had no procedures for dealing with enemies that created life faster than it could be destroyed. The galaxy was blooming with new worlds and new species as the Genesis Protocol spread beyond all control. Dr. Paul Richards watched in amazement as his biological scanners detected impossible readings from across the galaxy. Dead worlds that had been sterile for millions of years were suddenly teeming with life. The quantum terraforming effect was not just creating plants and animals, but entirely new forms of life that had never existed before. The galaxy itself was evolving in real time. The turning point came when Maya activated the final phase of the Genesis Protocol. Instead of targeting dead worlds, the system began seeding life. Throughout the dark matter clouds where the Harbingers had hidden their monitoring stations, ancient facilities that had operated in sterile isolation for eons were suddenly overrun with organisms that treated their technology as just another environment to colonize. Chris watched in wonder as Harbinger world ships began to malfunction and retreat. Their matter manipulation systems were being overwhelmed by the sheer quantity of life spreading through space around them. The ancient enemy had built their empire on controlling and limiting biological development, but now faced a galaxy where life evolved faster than their systems could process. Kate monitored the quantum network as it reached critical mass and began operating beyond her original design parameters. The Genesis Protocol had become self-sustaining and was creating new forms of life that even she could not predict. The galaxy was transforming into something completely different from what either humans or Harbingers had known before. The Harbinger fleet commanders made the decision to withdraw rather than face complete system failure. Their world ships retreated into dark space carrying warnings about a galaxy that had become too chaotic and too alive for their ancient protocols to control. They had spent millions of years preventing convergence only to trigger the very thing they feared most. Jake coordinated the final defensive actions as human and Council forces pursued the retreating enemy, but there was no need for revenge or continued fighting. The Harbingers were no longer a threat because the galaxy they had ruled no longer existed. In its place was something new and wild and beautiful that defied all their attempts at control. Ambassador Zethkar proposed the establishment of a memorial garden on New Terra to honor all the species that had been destroyed by Harbinger manipulation. Throughout galactic history, at the center would stand a monument to Earth, not mourning its loss, but celebrating what its children had accomplished. The inscription would read simply that they took our world, but we gave them the galaxy. Maya stood in the memorial garden watching children from dozens of different species play together under alien suns. The human refugees who had fled Earth as broken survivors had become the gardeners of a new galactic civilization. They had turned their greatest tragedy into the galaxy's greatest triumph by proving that life always finds a way to grow beyond the boundaries that others tried to impose. The last transmission from dying Earth had promised that humanity would plant new gardens among the stars. 15 years later, the galaxy bloomed with the proof of that promise kept. The Harbingers had tried to prevent convergence, but instead created a civilization that brought life to the lifeless and hope to the hopeless throughout the universe.